December 7, 1941. The morning sun rose over California's Central Valley like a slow-burning ember, the light bending across rows of frosted grass and the dull glint of training planes parked in a neat line. At the edge of the runway, a young flight cadet stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, watching as one aircraft after another lifted into the sky. His name was Richard Bong, 21 years old, from a small dairy farm near Poplar, Wisconsin. He had the kind of face that looked incapable of violence, open, boyish, faintly amused by everything, and yet within months he would become the deadliest American pilot of the Second World War. But on that morning, before the radio burst to life with reports of Japanese bombers over Pearl Harbor, Bong wasn't thinking about combat or history. He was thinking about the sky itself, how still it looked, how easily a man could vanish into it. Those who trained with him noticed early on that Bong was quiet but never timid. He had a way of smiling with one corner of his mouth, a small gesture that seemed to say he understood something others didn't. Born in 1920, he'd grown up milking cows before sunrise and helping his father repair machinery in the biting Wisconsin cold. His hands were rough from work, yet he could thread a model airplane propeller with a surgeon's precision. Flying fascinated him because it was both freedom and order, an exact science disguised as chaos. His mother, Dora, liked to say that even as a child he looked at clouds as though they were maps he could read. His father, Carl, warned him that the sky was no place for dreamers. Richard never argued, but he never listened either. By the time he enrolled at Superior State Teachers College, the war in Europe was already swallowing entire countries. Bong joined the civilian pilot training program partly for the free-flying hours, partly out of curiosity. What began as a hobby turned into obsession. Instructors remembered a student who never seemed hurried but always improved, a flyer whose calmness bordered on eerie. He'd repeat the same maneuver until every movement, throttle, rudder, roll, fit together like a perfect sentence. When he was accepted into the Army Air Corps in early 1941, he didn't celebrate. He simply said, "Now I can do it properly." Training at Luke Field, Arizona, revealed both his brilliance and his peculiar brand of defiance. Bong flew his trainer as though testing the patience of gravity itself. During one low pass, he clipped the top of a cottonwood tree but landed smiling, remarking that it gave the plane a haircut. Another time, he buzzed a woman hanging laundry outside her house so low that her clothesline snapped and sheets sailed into the air like surrender flags. General George Kenney, his commanding officer, grounded him for reckless flying but couldn't stay angry. Kenney later admitted, "That kid's reckless, but I like his fire. We'll need men like him soon." Even among pilots, Bong stood out for his contradictions. He was modest to the point of shyness, yet his flying bordered on arrogance. He never bragged, but he always wanted to be first off the runway. His peers respected him, though they whispered that he seemed addicted to danger. One recalled, "He didn't fly to show off. He flew like he was trying to solve something." Bong never spoke about fear. When asked what went through his mind during dives, he once replied, "Nothing. That's the point. If you're thinking, you're already too slow." Then came the news, Pearl Harbor. The base went silent for a full minute after the radio operator confirmed the attack. The world had shifted, and Bong felt the air around him thicken with a sense of inevitability. He wrote home that night, telling his parents, "I guess they'll need pilots now." It was the last letter that sounded casual. From then on, every word he wrote carried a new gravity, as though he already knew the war would not spare anyone untouched. His fellow trainees talked about glory, medals, revenge. Bong didn't. He studied. He memorized the characteristics of the Japanese Zero fighter, its turn radius, its climb rate, its weaknesses at high altitude. He practiced shooting at painted barrels on the desert floor until his aim was unerring. When other cadets rested, Bong remained in the hangar, staring at his aircraft as if it could teach him something new. Mechanics joked that he treated his plane better than his friends. He only smiled, replying, "My plane keeps me alive." But there was another side to him, a playful, almost mischievous warmth that surfaced when the engine stopped. He wrote letters to Marjorie Vitendel, a college sweetheart with movie star looks and small-town wit. He'd sketch tiny airplanes in the margins and end each letter with the same line, "Don't worry, I'm better in the air than on paper." That balance, discipline and tenderness, would come to define him. By late 1942, Bong had become one of the top graduates of his class. The Army Air Forces assigned him to the new P-38 Lightning, a twin-engine fighter unlike anything that had come before. It was fast, complex, and deadly, so much so that many pilots struggled to control it. Bong, however, treated the aircraft like an extension of his own body. Test flights showed he could outturn and outclimb nearly anyone in his unit. General Kenny noticed, remarking in a memo, "Lieutenant Bong has a feel for the P-38 that defies instruction. He senses it." The central conflict began not between Bong and the enemy, but within himself. The war demanded efficiency, Bong demanded perfection. While others measured success in survival, he measured it in precision. That quiet obsession began to worry his superiors. A fellow officer once told him, "You don't have to be the best, Dick." Bong replied without arrogance, "If I'm not, someone else will be. And he might not come back." It wasn't ego, it was fear disguised as logic, a compulsion born from the knowledge that every mistake meant a coffin sent home under a flag. As his deployment to the Pacific neared, Bong returned briefly to Wisconsin. The air felt different there, thicker, slower, kind in a way the world rarely was anymore. Neighbors treated him like a local celebrity, though he seemed uncomfortable with the attention. One afternoon he stood at the edge of his family's fields, watching a pair of hawks circle high above. His father asked quietly, "Still want to do this?" Bong nodded. "If I don't, someone else will have to." That simple answer said everything about him. Duty without drama, conviction without speech. When he boarded the transport plane bound for the Pacific in early 1943, he carried little besides a flight log, a few photographs of Marjorie, and a growing sense that his life had already narrowed to one purpose. As the engines rumbled to life, he looked out the small circular window at the American landscape slipping away. For a moment, he felt an ache for the stillness of poplar, the smell of rain-soaked soil, the sound of his mother calling him in for dinner. But sentimentality passed quickly, clarity returned. The sky was waiting. In later years, one of his instructors would say, "We knew Bong would either be the best pilot in the world, or the first to die trying." Neither prediction was entirely wrong. As the aircraft banked toward the horizon and disappeared into a veil of cloud, Richard Bong closed his eyes and exhaled. Somewhere ahead lay the war that would make him a legend, and somewhere behind, the last traces of the boy who once built toy planes in a barn. What he didn't yet know was that his calmness, his greatest strength, would also become his most dangerous flaw. The world was about to meet a man who treated death not as an enemy, but as an equation waiting to be solved. December 27, 1942. The sun was already brutal over New Guinea, hanging like a molten coin above a jungle that smelled of rot and rain. The airfield at Port Moresby trembled with the hum of engines, the metallic cough of generators, and the restless rhythm of men preparing for another mission. Among them moved Richard Bong, now Lieutenant Bong, his face bronzed by the tropical glare but still carrying that calm, detached focus that unnerved even his fellow pilots. His plane, a silver P-38 Lightning christened Marge after his sweetheart back home, stood waiting on the tarmac like a predator poised to strike. Every inch of the aircraft reflected both artistry and menace, twin engines gleaming, nose painted with the faint smile of a pin-up girl. It was not just his weapon, it was his mirror. The Pacific Theater was unlike anything Bong had imagined. It was not noble or orderly. It was heat and disease and endless noise. The jungle below swallowed planes whole, leaving no trace but smoke. The Japanese pilots were not faceless enemies but skilled hunters, men who flew as if born with wings. The Zeros they commanded could outturn almost anything in the sky. Against them, the American P-38 was faster but heavier, demanding finesse and nerve in equal measure. Bong learned this quickly. On his first combat mission, he nearly collided with another American pilot during a chaotic scramble. The radio buzzed with curses, orders, panic. Yet Bong's voice remained steady, almost cold. "Visual on target," he said, and seconds later, His guns stitched a burst of light across the sky that tore through a Zero's fuselage. It spiraled downward in flames. When he landed, mechanics noticed his hands didn't shake. They never did. His comrades admired him, though some feared him a little. There was something uncanny about the way Bong could anticipate enemy movements, as if he could see 2 seconds into the future. Captain Thomas Lynch, a seasoned pilot and one of Bong's closest friends, once remarked, "Dick doesn't fight the way we do. He's not reacting, he's composing." It was true. Bong treated every dogfight like a dance, one that demanded rhythm and patience. He would wait for the right note, the right second, before striking. Sometimes he'd vanish into the clouds, letting his enemy chase the ghost of his vapor trail, then reappear behind them with deadly precision. His style broke every rule of conventional aerial combat, but it worked. The central conflict was beginning to take shape, not between Bong and his superiors, who now praised him endlessly, but between the man and his own instincts. For every victory he earned, something quieter and more unsettling grew inside him. He began to crave the clarity of battle, that perfect stillness that came only when bullets were flying past his canopy. When the engines roared and adrenaline flooded his veins, he felt a strange peace that no medal or promotion could match. He knew it was dangerous, that kind of peace, but he didn't resist it. Some nights, when the airbase slept under the heavy silence of the tropics, Bong would walk out to the runway and stare at the distant horizon, trying to remember what it felt like to be ordinary. The memory was already fading. As the missions intensified through 1943, Bong's legend grew. He downed 3 enemy planes over Buna in one day, earning the Silver Star. A week later, he destroyed 2 more during an escort mission and brought his squadron home without a single loss. His methods were unorthodox. He often ignored radio discipline, slipped away from formations, and attacked from bizarre angles. Yet he always returned, often with another kill marked on the fuselage. When asked how he managed it, Bong would shrug. "Get close enough to smell their fuel," he'd say. "Then don't miss." His simplicity sounded arrogant until you realized it was rooted in precision. He believed that victory belonged to the pilot who stayed calm, not the one who burned brightest. The conditions were hellish. The heat warped metal, malaria decimated the ranks, and food came in tins that tasted of rust. The smell of aviation fuel clung to everything: their clothes, their hair, even their dreams. Many pilots began to unravel under the strain, but Bong's composure only deepened. Some mistook it for detachment. Lynch knew better. He saw the toll behind Bong's quietness, the exhaustion, the haunted stillness in his eyes after every mission. When a close friend, Captain Jerry Johnson, was shot down over La, Bong said nothing for hours. That night, he walked to the edge of the base and sat on a fuel drum, staring at the black ocean. Lynch found him there. "You did what you could," he said gently. Bong nodded once. "That's what everyone says," he replied, and fell silent again. Despite the gloom, humor found its way into Bong's life through his letters to Marjorie. He wrote with dry wit, sketching quick cartoons of dogfights and ending each letter with an understated line like, "Shot down 3 today. Wish you could have seen the fireworks." Marjorie became his lifeline, her photos taped inside the cockpit beside the altimeter. The ground crew called her our guardian angel, believing the sight of her kept him alive. Bong never denied it. "She keeps me steady," he once told them. "When I fly, it's just me and her picture up there." The Army Air Forces soon realized they had a symbol on their hands. Bong was promoted, decorated, and showcased in newspapers as America's Ace of Aces. But fame never seemed to touch him. He avoided interviews, ignored photographers, and spent his downtime tinkering with the P-38's gun alignment. When an officer congratulated him for being a national hero, Bong replied, "Heroes are the ones who don't come back." The remark spread through the unit, half admired, half feared. By late 1943, his kill count had reached 16. He was still alive, still flying, but something inside him was changing. The missions no longer felt like duty, they felt like necessity. He began flying more than required, volunteering for sorties even when grounded for fatigue. His superiors hesitated to stop him, his results were too valuable. But among the pilots, whispers began. Bong was chasing something invisible. Perhaps death. Perhaps the edge of perfection. One humid evening after a long mission, Bong sat alone in the mess tent, his food untouched. Lynch joined him, pouring a thin cup of coffee. "You ever think about stopping?" he asked. Bong looked up, genuinely puzzled. "Stopping what?" Lynch gestured at the empty cup between them. "All of it. Flying. Fighting. You've done enough." Bong's answer was quiet, almost tender. "If I stop, someone else has to go up tomorrow. Why should it be them instead of me?" Lynch had no reply. That was Bong's code. Simple, brutal, impossible to argue with. As 1944 approached, the jungle war began to tilt in the Allies' favor. Bong was now the most respected pilot in the Pacific, though he barely noticed. He'd become a paradox, a gentle man who killed efficiently, a modest hero who couldn't stop risking himself. The myth around him grew, but so did the unease among those who knew him best. They saw the flicker of fatigue behind his smile, the way he lingered by his plane as if afraid to leave it. When Bong climbed into Marge for yet another dawn patrol, Lynch watched from the runway. The engines roared to life, and for a moment, the sound drowned everything. The insects, the jungle, the war itself. The P-38 lifted gracefully, vanishing into a sky already streaked with the promise of violence. Lynch shaded his eyes and whispered, "One day, he won't come back." He wasn't wrong. But for now, the legend was still climbing, each mission drawing Richard Bong closer to the thin, perilous line between mastery and madness. March 1944. The war had entered its fever stage, and Richard Bong was no longer just a pilot. He was a symbol. Across the Pacific, his name traveled like a rumor carried on wind and static, whispered in tents and briefing rooms. The farm boy from Wisconsin who could make his P-38 dance in the sky while death chased his tail. Yet for Bong himself, glory felt distant, abstract. He didn't fly for fame. He flew because he had to, because only in the air did the world make sense. Everything below, orders, headlines, medals, felt unbearably slow. Up there, things were pure again, reduced to speed, instinct, and silence. By now, Bong had achieved 28 confirmed kills. His P-38 Marge bore painted victory flags beneath her cockpit, each one a quiet reminder of men who never made it home. The attention made him uneasy. Letters from home arrived by the dozen, children asking for autographs, journalists requesting interviews, but Bong read them with polite detachment, then tucked them away in his trunk. His fame wasn't something he earned, it was something that happened to him, like weather. He trusted only the sky, and even that was starting to change. He had begun to develop a method, one his peers alternately admired and feared. In the evenings, while others relaxed, Bong sat alone at a crude wooden desk in the dim light of a kerosene lantern, sketching flight paths on scraps of paper. He studied patterns, angles of attack, the weaknesses of both man and machine. He wrote notes in tiny, meticulous script, patience before attack. Never rush. Make them believe you're gone. His fellow pilots started calling it Bong's method of madness, though it was neither. It was precision disguised as obsession. When he flew, every movement was rehearsed, every burst of fire a calculated equation. "It isn't madness," he told Lieutenant Tommy McGuire one night. "It's mathematics. You can solve any problem if you get close enough to see it clearly." McGuire, a talented pilot himself, grinned. "Until the problem shoots back." Bong smiled faintly. "That's why you solve it first." McGuire was perhaps the only man who could rival him. They shared an unspoken bond built on competition and respect, two predators circling the same horizon. Both sought perfection, but for different reasons. McGuire wanted recognition, a record to carve his name into history. Bong wanted mastery, something quieter, internal, unmeasurable. When McGuire scored several quick kills in succession, Bong congratulated him warmly but spent the next evening practicing tighter turns and steeper dives. "You're chasing numbers," McGuire teased. Bong didn't argue. "Maybe," he said, "but I'd rather they were mine than the enemy's." Combat had become almost ritual for him. Before each mission, he performed the same sequence, tighten his gloves twice, tap the photo of Marjorie inside the cockpit, then whisper a single line under his breath, "Steady." The word was both command and prayer. Once airborne, he entered a state of serene focus that bordered on otherworldly. Witnesses said he moved through dogfights as though time had slowed for him alone. When the chaos cleared, he was always the last to return, engines sputtering, ammunition spent, another victory claimed. By mid-1944, he reached 40 confirmed kills, surpassing every American fighter pilot in the war. The record made him a national hero, and the Army insisted he return home for public relations duties. General Kenney himself presented him with the Medal of Honor, reading from the citation that described Bong's daring and intrepidity in the face of the enemy. Cameras flashed, reporters crowded, and Bong stood there, awkward in his pressed uniform, shifting from foot to foot like a boy caught skipping church. When the ceremony ended, he accidentally dropped his gloves, muttered, "Guess I'm better in the air than on the ground," and the crowd laughed. It was one of the few times he'd been visibly uncomfortable. He wasn't built for parades, his stage was the sky. Still, the toll was beginning to show. He'd lost too many friends, Lynch, Johnson, and others whose names now hung in silence at the mess hall. At night, Bong's calm demeanor cracked just slightly. He'd sit outside his quarters, cigarette glowing in the dark, staring into the jungle as if expecting it to answer him. When asked if he slept well, he replied, "Sometimes too well. That's what scares me." It wasn't fear of dying that haunted him, it was fear of getting used to killing. The war had stripped away the simple world he'd once known. The boy who milked cows at dawn was gone, replaced by a man who measured life in seconds and gunfire. Even in exhaustion, his precision never faltered. His reputation as a teacher grew, young pilots sought him out for advice. He instructed them with quiet patience, sketching diagrams in the dirt with a stick. "Don't chase," he'd say. "Wait for them to make the mistake. Patience wins fights." Some of his students would later say Bong's calmness saved their lives more than once. But those closest to him could see that calm for what it was, a mask stretched over fatigue. The Army, perhaps sensing his limits, finally ordered him stateside for good. Bong resisted at first, insisting he could still contribute. Kenney, now more father than commander, told him firmly, "You've done enough, son. It's time to come down." So Bong returned to America, not as a soldier seeking rest, but as a man unsure how to exist without the war. Everywhere he went, people applauded. Parades were held in his honor, his face appeared in magazines beside the word hero, and yet he seemed adrift. "They make it sound easy," he told Marjorie during a quiet drive through Los Angeles. "Like I just pulled a trigger and came home. They don't see what's left behind up there." She reached for his hand. "You're home now, Dick." He squeezed back gently. "Am I?" Peace, he discovered, was its own kind of battle. The air was too still, the days too predictable. Without the hum of engines and the urgency of combat, Bong felt weightless in all the wrong ways. He volunteered to test America's newest jet, the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star. It was fast, revolutionary, a glimpse of the future he'd once dreamed of as a boy watching mail planes cut across Wisconsin skies. He approached it not as a thrill-seeker but as a craftsman, drawn to its challenge. Friends worried he was seeking danger again, but Bong dismissed them with a gentle laugh. "I'm not chasing anything," he said. "I just want to see what's next." Despite the accolades, his demeanor never changed. He still wrote to Marjorie, still joked with mechanics, still carried himself with that same quiet balance. Yet beneath it all was a restlessness that peace couldn't cure. The Army's psychiatrists might have called it post-war adjustment, Bong would have called it habit. Flying had become his language, his only fluent expression. Without it, words felt clumsy, life uncoordinated. In one of his final interviews before returning to test duty, a reporter asked him what he felt during a dogfight. Bong thought for a moment, eyes distant. "Nothing," he said softly. "Everything happens so fast there's no room for feeling. You just move until it's over. Then you land, and all of it catches up to you." The reporter pressed, "And what catches up to you?" Bong smiled faintly. "The noise." By the spring of 1945, he seemed almost peaceful again. He was preparing to marry Marjorie, settle down, maybe teach flying someday. Friends remarked that he finally looked content. But those who truly knew him suspected that for Bong, contentment was only another form of waiting. The world had slowed, but his pulse had not. Somewhere deep down, he still heard the echo of propellers slicing the air, still felt that impossible calm that came only when death was close enough to see. What Bong couldn't know, what none of them could, was that his next flight would be the one battle he couldn't win. And this time, the enemy wouldn't be shooting back. August 6, 1945. The California sun rose over Burbank with a brilliance that made the horizon shimmer, a golden calm masking the tremors beneath history's surface. On that same morning, Richard Bong, America's top ace, woke before dawn, lacing his boots with the same quiet precision he'd once used before combat. The room smelled faintly of aviation fuel, a scent that clung to him even on land, as if the air itself refused to let him forget who he was. He had dreamed of flying the new jet again, the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star, sleek and silver like a blade from the future. It was his chance to prove, once more, that he belonged where the sky was thin and sound dissolved into silence. Marjorie stirred beside him, half awake, her hair falling across the pillow like spilled sunlight. "You're leaving early again," she murmured. He paused, studying her face. In the quiet, he saw everything he wanted yet never truly believed he could keep: peace, stillness, love. "Just one more test," he said softly. "Then I'm done, I promise." Her eyes opened, worried but trusting. "You've said that before." Bong smiled, brushing his thumb across her cheek. "And I've always come back, haven't I?" But the words felt heavier than before, as if they knew something he didn't. At Lockheed Field, the runway stretched endlessly into morning haze. Engineers moved briskly around the gleaming prototype, checking gauges, tightening panels. The B-80 was unlike anything Bong had flown. No propellers, no comforting rumble of pistons, only the pure, high scream of jet thrust. It represented everything he'd fought for: progress, power, a sky reimagined. Yet it also carried an unfamiliar unease. Jet engines were new territory, temperamental and unpredictable. Still, Bong's calm never faltered. He greeted the crew with quiet humor, shook hands, and inspected the aircraft as if memorizing a friend's face before parting ways. "Ready, Dick?" an engineer asked, clipboard in hand. "Ready as I'll ever be," Bong replied, climbing into the cockpit. The metal seat was hot from the sun, the controls smooth and cold. He fastened his harness, then tapped the small photograph taped beside the altimeter. Marjorie, smiling. "Steady," he whispered, just as he always had before takeoff. The tower's voice crackled through the radio. "Bong, you are cleared for Flight Test 3. Maintain heading west. Godspeed." He eased the throttle forward. The jet rolled down the strip, wind building, the earth trembling beneath it. The ground fell away, and once again, the world simplified. Below him, roads and houses shrank into patterns of geometry. Above, endless blue. For a moment, he felt weightless in the best way, neither hero nor soldier, just a man and his machine carving through sky. But something was wrong. At 300 feet, the engine coughed, sputtered, then screamed. Alarms flared red across the dashboard. The P-80 jerked violently to one side, losing thrust. Bong's instincts took over. He throttled back, checked fuel flow, then re-engaged ignition. Nothing. The engine roared once more, then cut out completely. Silence. A kind of silence he'd never known. He was too low to bail out. Years of combat flashed through him, not memories, but sensations. Tracer fire, burning clouds, the tremor of adrenaline in his fingertips. He'd escaped death 100 times over the Pacific. But this was different. This wasn't war. This was physics. Below, mechanics looked up, shielding their eyes as the silver jet began to fall. It was still smooth, still graceful, like a bird folding its wings. Bong fought the controls, searching for lift, searching for a miracle. The plane refused to answer. "Come on," he muttered, forcing calm, his voice steady even as the altimeter spun down. Steady, steady. The ground rose fast. At the last moment, he tried to eject, but the low altitude betrayed him. The P-80 struck a row of houses just beyond the airfield, exploding in a blossom of fire and black smoke. For a long moment, no one moved. The radio stayed open, hissing static. Then someone whispered, "Bong's down." The news traveled faster than sound. Within minutes, the base fell silent. Men who'd seen entire squadrons vanish in combat now stood frozen, unable to grasp that their most invincible pilot was gone, not in a dogfight, but in a test flight on home soil. A few miles away, Marjorie was ironing his uniform, humming softly, unaware that the man she loved had already crossed into legend. The same day, halfway across the world, a different sky burned, Hiroshima. The first atomic bomb had fallen, changing humanity forever. Two explosions, two ends of the same story. One pilot's flame extinguished just as another fire began to devour cities. History has its cruel poetry. By afternoon, reporters crowded Lockheed's gates. General Kenny arrived in person, his face carved with disbelief. He'd always imagined Bong would outlive the war, outfly the impossible. "It shouldn't have been him," he said quietly. "It should never have been him." But fate had no hierarchy. The sky, generous as it was, always demanded payment. When they recovered what was left of the wreckage, the photograph of Marjorie was found intact, edges scorched but her smile untouched. Kenny held it for a long time before passing it to a young mechanic. "Take care of this," he said. "It's all that's left of the best we had." News of Bong's death spread across America by evening. Radio announcers delivered it in hushed tones, each voice wavering slightly, as if struggling to accept that the country's deadliest pilot had fallen not to enemy fire, but to the future he helped create. Newspapers called it a cruel irony, but the men who'd flown beside him knew better. Bong's end wasn't irony, it was inevitability. He had lived at the edge of risk for too long, balancing between control and chaos, until the line finally disappeared. In Superior, Wisconsin, flags dropped to half-mast. Farmers left tractors idle in the fields, church bells tolled, and children who'd once written him letters now asked their parents why heroes couldn't come home. Marjorie received the telegram at sunset. She didn't cry at first. She simply folded the message and placed it beside the photograph he'd sent her months before, a picture of him smiling beside the P-38 Marge, his arm resting on its silver frame. Only later, when the night deepened and the hum of distant traffic faded, did she whisper, "You promised." In the weeks that followed, Bong's name became immortal. Streets were renamed, airfields dedicated, statues raised. But for those who had known him, remembrance carried an ache that honors couldn't soothe. To them, he wasn't the man in the headlines, he was the quiet boy who believed that patience could outfly chaos, the pilot who found peace only when the world around him burned. And yet, in a strange, poetic symmetry, his death embodied the very philosophy he'd lived by. Bong's method of madness had always been about control, about mastering the uncontrollable, outthinking fear itself. On that final morning, even as the jet fell, he never panicked. He fought gravity with discipline, not desperation. When the engine failed, his last word was the same as it had always been: steady. History would remember his courage, his 40 kills, his flawless calm under fire. But those who understood him knew his true victory wasn't in destruction, it was in grace. Bong didn't fly to kill, he flew to conquer the chaos that surrounded him. And in doing so, he revealed the thin line between genius and madness, life and oblivion. As the smoke cleared that day, the Pacific's most feared pilot had vanished into a different kind of sky, one where engines never fail and the horizon is endless. His legend remained, carried on the wind that once bore his wings. And somewhere, far beyond the noise of war, Richard Bong flew steady one last time.